The city of Alkink stands tall and wide as a relic of forgotten pasts. Alkink is one of the oldest cities on Uthalpaba, and it was originally built as a holy site dedicated to their goddess Auk, the goddess of beauty, compassion, and women. The first structure, the Temple of Auk, was, according to local oral legend, built after Auk spared the Angau people from extinction at the hands of her brother god, Athergalth, for it was Auk who turned the Athergalth's thorns into flowers and poisons to perfume to spread kindness and beauty over Achotha instead of death and destruction. This ancient tale is why the people of Alkink loved and praised their patron goddess and why they built the great city in her name. The culture of Alkink was highly matriarchal. They believed that women ought to rule the people, treating their subjects with love and care like their children while the men provide. Women made up the overwhelming majority of government positions, whereas men made up most of the labor and military force. Although this stance wasn't the most outlandish to the northern tribes, the people of Alkink were the most staunch proponents of this ideal. The focus on women was so complete in Alkink that it was common for men to willingly volunteer to become eunuchs to appear more feminine, so much so that the population of Alkink suffered greatly throughout its history. To compensate for the population issues, a yearly Festival of Coition was orchestrated in the city, in which men from allied tribal groups would travel to Alkink to have children, with the caveat that the men were not allowed to stay or even know their potential offspring. As opposed to the harsh and barren western desert, the lands surrounding Alkink were pleasant and fertile. The river provided adequate fish and clean water, the grasslands allowed for plentiful farms and pastures, and the forest provided more than enough lumber and wild game. The people of Alkink were quite naturalistic, preferring the outdoors and natural areas as opposed to anything tight and enclosed. They had practically no mines whatsoever, very few tall buildings, and everything was spread out. The city of Alkink itself, even if in a more primitive state, was perhaps one of the largest cities in terms of width on all of Uthalpaba. Practically every house had a garden, chicken coop, apiary, or other such structure, and the distance between buildings was relatively large. As a result, the people of Alkink are believed to be the first to figure out how to mount and ride cattle for transport, and specific breeds have been bred for generations to make them quicker and or to bear more weight. These breeds of cattle were the most widely used means of transportation, both within the city of Alkink and across its wider sphere of influence. Although Alkink's sphere of influence was large, Alkink itself was only a city-state, whose lands were small compared to the lands they could directly control if they so chose. They had just enough to house the city and a little more. Thanks to their revolutionary form of transportation, notoriously great diplomats, having the only agrarian culture and city in the north, and the only centralized government, Alkink maintained an impressive amount of tribal vassals that enabled Alkink to become a powerful region and expand their overall area of influence drastically. Although these tribal vassals contributed in a martial capacity, they were first and foremost an economic asset. The eastern tribes provided lumber and game, the southern tribes provided agriculture, fish, lumber, and game specific to the Uyujapukuau, and the western tribes provided animal products and metals from the Ortigau Mountains. The most important of these tribes was the Hajuler Gink to the west. The Hajuler Gink tribe's patron god, Hajuler Gi, is a deity of hunting, competition, sports, and animals. This tribe was the military backbone of Alkink, and whereas Alkink focused on plants and agriculture, the Hajuler Gink people focused on animals, and they did so in a far more militaristic manner. They bred and armored dogs to fight, cattle to ride or as portable walls, chickens for eggs and goats for milk for provisions on campaigns, covered pigs in pitch and tar, set them ablaze and made them charge into enemies, nurtured hives of bees in jars to throw at enemies, used pigeons as couriers back home, and they domesticated eagles, bears, and lions to a limited capacity. This was done so that instead of wasting human lives, animals would instead take the majority of casualties, and it's claimed that the army of Hajuler Gink had far more animals than humans. This unique type of warfare and martial culture is what allowed the Hajuler Gink tribes to be so effective and pivotal to Alkink society. Though the military of the tribes of the Hujulurgink helped Alkink significantly, they still faced problems to the west in the Oidigao Mountains. Within the mountains was a confederation of tribes known as the Ualthuyurn. The Ualthuyurn were decentralized, poor, warlike, and sedentary people who subsisted on mining in the mountains, banditry, and trading with other tribes. The Ualthuyurn were a people of different faith and culture than Alkink, and the two groups rarely got along. Conflicts between the Alkink and Ualthuyurn were perpetual along the northern tip of the Oidigao Mountains throughout the Twilight Era and into the Dawn. Alkink wanted access to metals from the mountains, while the Ualthuyurn wanted agricultural products from the Embose River. Thanks to the Hujulurgink, the Ualthuyurn were never enough of a problem to trample through Alkink, but they were enough of an issue to prevent any permanent and long-lasting control over the mountains or reliable sources of metal. Other than the conflicts with the Ualthuyurn, Alkink faced no major outside threats, and their borders were limited more by administrative capacity and distance than by warfare. Everything within Alkink society was to further one purpose, the Archive of Kijki-Uf. The Archive of Kijki-Uf was a grand, imposing stone structure, larger than anything else ever built in the entire north. It was built outside of the city of Alkink on the outskirts, so that it could be expanded upon forever, and within its halls were innumerable texts and artifacts from all across the four corners. Though an archive in name, it served as more of a vault or even a dungeon, for much of the writings and artifacts within were kept there permanently, never to be seen again but by rare curators. All of the metal, lumber, animals, and food not used at home was used abroad to trade for artifacts. Alkink traders and archaeologists went as far as the Agane, Jitalmank, the Uyajuina, the Athergalth, and even the Twin Peninsulas of the east. Alkink uncovered and reclaimed ancient ruins all across the north, purchased artifacts from every culture they knew, and they would pay exorbitant sums of wealth to wise men just to hear their oral traditions, histories, stories, and beliefs. All of these artifacts and recounts were taken to the Archive of Kijki-Uf, where historians, scribes, and archivists cataloged and studied before shutting them behind closed doors. The Archive of Kijki-Uf was one of the most important locations in the Twilight Era, and arguably the earlier portion of the Dawn Era, and the secret histories hidden within were invaluable. Even though Alkink was the largest and most recent Twilight Era civilization in the area, two smaller but important groups called the region home, the people of Embosink and Orhink. The Embose River was named after Embose, a god of dreams, thoughts, and fungus. Before Alkink rose to prominence, followers of Embose had their own civilization, which was more sophisticated than Alkink ever was, and their nation was claimed to be the oldest upon Achotha. This ancient society was known for its heavy use of psychedelic drugs and their proclivity for sleeping, though their goal was not to sleep, but to wake up, for they believed that the world of Achotha was fake, and that the real world was glimpsed in dreams and death. The Embosink people would often practice lucid dreaming and could spiritually walk around Uthalpaba in their sleep, accurately describing events that happened as they were asleep, or places they never went to or could go to while awake. Embosink people would often write down, retell, and study their collective dreams, and the most well-versed of these scholars were known as dream seers. The art and architecture of these people was also eclectic, strange, and distinct from any other culture on Uthalpaba, and Embosink prided themselves in their colorful and unique culture. The Embosink were so enthralled with their own art that they became a civilization of art and decadence. The art of Embosink is often seen as so strange that their art styles and architecture are used by other cultures as psychological torture against prisoners, and many off-limits locations, like forts and some municipal buildings, are built with this style in mind to keep people away simply by how inhuman and unnatural they appear. This odd and colorful, though lesser-known culture came to an end when the Embosink ritualistically ended their lives through imbibing psychedelic poisons to become free of their Achothan prison. The entirety of Embosink was destroyed by their own hand, but remnants of Embosink remained as a tribal group under the benevolent vassalage of Alkink, who arose in their destruction, and the infamous Yellow Book of Embose still circulates throughout the Four Corners. The second lesser civilization was Orhink. Orhi, their patron goddess, is a goddess of cacophony, chaos, music, and fear, whose son is the god Iriuawapu, a serpentine god that swims around Uthapaba in circles forever. The people of Orhink lived scattered around the northernmost corner of the world, all along the coast. Orhink's most important location was the city of East Orhink. A city in name only, the collection of driftwood and hide shacks that made up East Orhink was built around a large, deep cove on the northern coast. Within local legend, that cove was once a proper and flourishing city built out of kelp, glass, coral, and chitin, but it was pulled into the ocean by Iriuawapu, where it still remains, fully inhabited, beneath the waves. The people of Orhink had strong nautical cultural motifs, and just like their sunken city, they had clothes and tools made out of or in the style of crustaceans, coral, shells, and other water-based materials. Orhink also had a sophisticated navy, with a large fleet that sailed along the northern coast. The boats were so large in number that more Orhink people lived on boats than land. Orhink also had an affinity for traveling over land too, for many of them would make an annual pilgrimage to the Uyajuina, where an enclave of Orhink took shelter at an ancient artifact of Orhi's called the Dread Drum, which was built into the plateaus of the region. While on this pilgrimage, Orhink travelers would never walk in a straight line. Instead, they made their journey moving side to side in a zigzagging manner until they made it to the Dread Drum to perform all manner of musical rituals to worship their cardinal deity. Unfortunately, both Embosink and Orhink were destroyed in ancient history, and come the Dawn Era and the rise of the Ipo Olgwe, Alkink, for all its power and influence, was annihilated by the Ipo Olgwe. The archive of Kijgiyuf specifically faced the greatest destruction, for the people of the Ipo Olgwe viewed the artifacts and text within as profane, evil, and even impossible. Now, Alkink is only a shadow of what they used to be, and their ancient twilight power, influence, and invaluable knowledge is gone.